Did you hear the news? This week, Fisher's Island teams won first, second, and third place in the IOD Worlds race in Norway. Wow. One of the teams includes my coach, John Burnham. Along with meals to celebrate their victories, their Norwegian hosts gave them a guided tour of the dockyard where the International One Design boats were created. How awesome. It is so fascinating to learn about sailing from conversations with friends who know so much and reflect on their experiences out on the water. As you all know, it takes courage and wisdom to venture out onto the waves in any type of watercraft. And sometimes the weather is just not suitable, as we find it changes from day to day and from moment to moment. Well, the gospel according to Mark is wonderfully direct. Everything included in the Bible is there for a reason, and in Mark, it's like all the details have been taken into consideration. And then it has been boiled down to the pure essence of the message of what Jesus Christ said and did. We see the effect of his words and actions on the world, in the realms of people, in the realm of spirits. And in this passage, Jesus shows his power over creation itself, his ability to command the wind and the waves. We should pay close attention to the question the disciples ask and how Jesus responds in action. And then we must consider the questions Jesus asks, the response of the disciples. How will we respond? We are in Mark 4, and it's the end of a long day when Jesus and his disciples have been out in a village on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They're away from home, reaching more and more people. They have had a hectic, tiresome day. They were helping the crowds of people. Jesus was healing them. He was teaching, and they didn't even have time to stop for lunch. They were tired, and finally, it was the end of the day. They got into the boat to head back across the water. Jesus went to sit on a cushion in the stern. He was so wiped out, he fell asleep. Now, for those who are familiar with Scripture, that detail should get our attention right away. It should remind us of the prophet Jonah. Remember in Jonah chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, God called Jonah and told him, "Go overland to the far northeast, to the great city of Nineveh, and preach to the people." But in verse 3, Jonah ran the opposite way to the port city of Joppa. He bought a ticket for a boat heading west to the city of Tarshish on the Mediterranean. It may have been as far away as Spain. The first thing Jonah did was go down below deck and sleep on a pillow. Sure enough, in the next verse, we find that God sent a wind and a storm onto the sea. There was a great storm, and the passengers cried out to their gods, and the crew threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the load. And the remaining 12 verses of that chapter 1 describe the efforts to deal with the crisis. Jonah confessed it was his fault for disobeying God. He convinced them they didn't want to, but he said, "Listen, you got to throw me overboard." And they did. And then God calmed the sea and provided a big fish to protect him. And Jonah prayed fervently to the Lord. Now you may know that a number of Jesus' disciples were skilled sailors, having grown up in that region right on the shores of Galilee. Peter and the brothers James and John had been fishing in their families' fishing boats when Jesus called them to follow and become fishers of people. Peter's brother Andrew was also a disciple involved in the fishing business with their family. And the rest of the 12 were from that region around the water. So they knew how to deal with sailing. They understood what they were facing whenever they set out from land. And on that day, when they set out, the weather was fine, so they were not being irresponsible or taking an unnecessary risk. You may know that the geography around the Sea of Galilee includes hills, such as Mount Arbel and Mount Hermon, which can rise up to 2,000 feet above sea level. And in the winter, there's good skiing in Israel over there. Wind funnels can cause a storm to arise quickly. The water is in a valley almost 700 feet below sea level, and it is shallow, about 200 feet deep. So suddenly on this journey, the boat was affected by high waves that crashed around them, and water came over the side of the boat. This big storm made them extremely worried. They were so worried and afraid, they felt it was going to be the end of their life. Perhaps you have a time that you can relate to the fear of the disciples that day on the water. Well, Rembrandt painted a view of this stormy event, his only known seascape. The painting is titled "The Storm on the Sea of Galilee," and it is sometimes referred to as Christ in the Storm. So I put a copy of it on our bulletin today. You'll notice right away that the painting is vertical, not horizontal. Landscapes are usually horizontal, taking the whole vista, but this view of nature emphasizes the vast sky and all its dramatic changes that are causing trouble for those in the boat. Did you happen to see the painting when it was at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston? Wow. Unfortunately, it was stolen by two thieves in 1990. They were impersonating police officers. They cut the painting out of the frame, and now the empty frame remains in place, a testament of hope that it may be recovered and returned one day. I hope so. Now, Rembrandt painted this when he was 27 years old in 1633. He was living in Amsterdam, and it was the year before he married his dear wife, Saskia. His painting career was off to a great start, and he was teaching painting to a couple of students, and he was accepted into the Guild of Painters in the city of Amsterdam. Now, Rembrandt grew up in the family of a miller in Leiden on the banks of the Rhine River, which his father added to their last name. So he's known as Rembrandt Harmenson van Rijn. You may know that about 26% of the Netherlands is under sea level. The Netherlands and Belgium are known as the Low Countries for this reason. And Amsterdam itself is 6 feet below sea level. So as a Dutch native, Rembrandt had a healthy respect for the power of the sea and the power of the storms affecting ships and the people on them. Apparently, this ship in the painting resembles in some ways a North Sea fishing boat. The thing I love about Rembrandt, not only is his artwork beautiful, but he was a person of deep faith. He thought carefully about which moment to portray when he created a painting of a biblical event. In the 1600s, these scenes were called history paintings because from the point of view of Western art, what is described in the historical books of the Bible definitely happened. And Rembrandt wanted us as viewers to look closely and be drawn into a sense of the immediacy of the moment, as though we were there when it happened. You may know that Rembrandt is associated with the dramatic use of light and shadow, especially in the early period of his painting. And this is the moment of crisis. There is a blue sky on the left as the boat is in between the sunny area of blue sky and the stormy clouds and wind that have come in so quickly. While the waves crash against the boat, the mast makes a dramatic diagonal cross. and the powerful storm has caused the sail to rip. It's hard to see, but there are rocks in the left foreground, and one of the disciples has become seasick. The disciples were trying to respond quickly and well, pulling the lines, doing their best, but it was challenging and chaotic. They did not have the muscle power or the ability to solve this problem in the midst of the storm. They were so afraid. They were terrified. They shouted to Jesus for help. "Teacher, aren't you concerned that we are about to die?" Jesus woke up, and with their abrupt cries for help, he responded immediately. He was not an ordinary person. He did not say, "I'm scared too. What are we going to do?" He immediately responded with peace. Jesus was calm. His face was bright. He was not worried or concerned. He was with them, and he would get them through it. He stood up and commanded the wind, "Silence, be still." Instantly, the wind stopped, and the waves stopped. There was a great calm. Jesus is calm. He cares very much. The disciples were scared and cried out for help, and Jesus did calm the storm. He saved them. They were so relieved and thankful that he brought peace. He got them to safety. Biblical scholar William Barclay noted that the command Jesus gave to the wind, "Silence, be still," is exactly what Jesus had said earlier in Mark chapter 1, when he commanded the evil spirits to be silent and come out of the man. Jesus is Lord over all. Jesus is Lord over evil spirits, and now the disciples see Jesus has revealed himself as Lord over all creation. Now they see. They have a whole new perspective. They are no longer afraid about the storm. And Jesus asked them, "Why are you fearful? Do you still not have faith?" The word fear in this passage relates to the disciples. They feared the dangers of the world and the storm on the sea, and Jesus solved their problem. And then they said to each other, "Wait a minute. Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Seriously, he spoke and commanded the storm to stop, and it did. Only God is in charge of creation. Jesus must be God. The disciples looked at him with awe and reverence. The word fear is used again here. They feared him, as in they honored him as God. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, we read in Psalms and Proverbs. And we are assured that this means the reverence for God. That is the first thing that we need to have and we need to show in our lives. Jonah didn't obey God's voice at first, and it went badly for him until he confessed to the men on the boat and took responsibility for his actions. And then when he revered the Lord and prayed for help, God answered and rescued him. In the storm on the Sea of Galilee, the disciples did not disobey God. Perhaps this was God's way of revealing at just the right time the full understanding of who Jesus is. That's what they needed to know. The person they were walking alongside of, the person who was teaching and healing, wasn't just a prophet. He was greater than Jonah and all who came before. He is the divine one who is able to speak commands to the wind, and his word is obeyed. Jesus is truly God, responding with compassion and decisive action. He simply is the Lord who does what brings wholeness in our time of need. unlike those imposters who dressed up as police officers in Boston back in 1990 in order to break the law and steal the painting. Jesus wasn't pretending to be anything other than who he was. And it was time for the disciples to know the fullness of his divinity as well as his humanity. In Rembrandt's painting, Jesus and the 12 disciples are shown in the boat, and there is a 14th person pulling on a line with one hand, holding onto his hat with the other. It's a Rembrandt self-portrait. He looks directly out at us from the midst of the storm. It is fascinating to study the paintings in which Rembrandt included himself as a participant. I think he does it as a way to connect with us, to catch our attention and draw us in. Russ Ramsey, a pastor in Nashville, wrote about this painting, saying that Rembrandt's self-portrait looks out, asking us to engage with the questions of the story. Does Jesus care if we are in a boat in a storm? Will he help us in the midst of chaos? In our life, we all may relate to that question. As we face storms in our family and our friendships, as we face rocky seas in our career or tough times in our community, and we are concerned about the chaos in world events, I think that Rembrandt's gaze is meant to ask us, remember, don't you remember what happens next? Jesus calms the storm. He did it then for those guys in that boat on the Sea of Galilee. Rembrandt believed that Jesus was going to calm the storm for him in 1633. And Rembrandt went through some tough times, including bankruptcy in his lifetime. And the Lord brought him through that. And he trusted that the Lord would save him. I think that's why Rembrandt wants to draw us into this picture. He wants us to trust that God is going to be with us. He's going to answer our cries for help. We may fear that maybe he's asleep on the cushion, but he knows what's going on, and he is right here with us, and he's going to bring us through it. At the right time, God acts decisively, and he brings salvation. He calms the storms in our life, and he will act decisively when we need it. Yes, Jesus is the Lord of heaven and earth, the divine one, the Son of God, who will save all who trust in him. Amen.